June 13th, 1980. Allan Gore is leaving his Texas home, his wife, Betty, and 2 daughters for a business trip in Minnesota. While he's gone, friend of the family, Candy Montgomery, stops by the Gore home to get a bathing suit for Betty and Allan's oldest daughter, Alyssa, who's spending the night with Candy's kids. But when Candy shows up that day at 410 Dogwood Street, only one of the women would emerge alive. The one having an affair. This is the incredibly true story of Candy Montgomery and Allan and Betty Gore. 2's a marriage, 3's a murder. Hey y'all, I'm Chris Calvert.
And I'm her husband, Rob Potter. Welcome to Hitched to Homicide.
For better or worse.
Till death do us part.
Welcome back, everybody.
Yes, welcome. And I'm going to do a repeat, and I'll tell you why in a second.
Okay.
Bienvenido para mis amigos Tommy Milligan y encantadora novia Marty. Y todos mis amigos en Sudamérica. There you go.
You are giving a very, very personal hello.
Yeah. Well, I probably botched up the pronunciation. Tommy is my best friend from high school and his lovely wife, Marty. We had a nice conversation with him on the phone this week. Tommy and I were exchange students in South America when we were in high school. And he went on to become very involved in the Latino culture. He's on the board of directors on a Columbia University, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, he's very, very fluent in Spanish. I'm not. So, Tommy, I apologize if I butchered that. So there you go. Welcome.
They're also fans of the show.
Yes, they are. Yeah. They have a lake home, and it's like, 3 hours away. And every time they go up there, they listen the entire time to our podcast and over. They love them. And we love them.
We have lots of people who like to send us messages and say that they either save them up for a big trip or
Yep.
We just love that you're listening.
Yep, absolutely.
And we also love it when you like, rate, and review the show.
Yep.
We love it when you send us emails and drop us a line on social media.
Yes, we
If
do.
you like Hitched to Homicide, give us some stars and a quick comment.
Yep.
We really do appreciate all of our listeners. And speaking of, go join the H2H In-Laws and Outlaws. If this is your first listen with us, they are our extended family here at Hitched to Homicide. And if you like true crime, you won't regret it.
Yeah. We have some great members.
They are the smartest, funniest group of people
Yep.
that I feel privileged to be associated
Yeah.
with.
And I also, since we're talking about them, I have to give a very nice shout out and thank you to everyone that wished me a very happy birthday.
Rob had a birthday this past week. He did.
Yep. So thank you all. It's greatly appreciated.
Well, this case was actually suggested by one of our listeners. There's some movies about the case. There's a series that dropped on Hulu. And as soon as that happened, I got an email about it. Then HBO did a movie on this case just this past spring. So here we are today, and I'm ready to dive in and talk about Candy.
All right.
Before we get started, let me thank some sources. Texas Monthly, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, Wichita Falls Times, the Oxygen Network, Mashable.com, the Crime Wire, the Abilene Reporter News, and good old Wikipedia.
All right. Well, you ready?
I am.
All right, let's do it.
Betty Eileen Pomeroy Gore is born on January 9th, 1950 in Harper, Texas, to Charles and Bertha Hancock Pomeroy.
Okay.
She had 2 siblings, brothers, and her mom was a stay-at-home mother while her dad was an insurance salesman. Betty is a tiny little thing at 5'2". She's not the muscular type at all. She's sort of thin, frail, and petite.
Okay.
But she was a very popular girl in this rural community of Norwich, Texas, which is where she grew up. And she was really involved in school activities.
Right.
She was on student council, that kind of thing. Just a very popular kid.
Gotcha.
When Betty goes away to college, she falls for the TA in her math class. His name is Allan Gore, and these two decided to get married. Now, Betty's family and friends were like, hold the phone. Betty's beautiful. She's quite the catch. And she's marrying this plain-looking dude with puffy cheeks, a receding hairline, and glasses.
Huh.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. But her family thought, this is not the kind of guy that, Betty usually dated.
Yeah, right.
Not to mention, Allan was pretty shy, and that sometimes came across as like he was unapproachable or even that he was a snob. I think he was just really, really awkward.
Gotcha.
Nevertheless, Betty and Allan are married in January of 1970 when Betty is just 20 years old, and these two settle in Dallas, Texas. Now, somewhere during this time, apparently Betty has an affair with another man, but these two seem to work it out.
Okay.
Then after their first daughter is born, they move to Collin County. Allan is now working for Rockwell International, and Rockwell International is a major defense contractor.
Right.
And a couple of the articles I read said that Betty wasn't happy the first time she found out she was pregnant. But she is.
Why wasn't she happy about it?
I just think she wasn't ready to be a mom or didn't want to get pregnant. I mean, they got married when she's 20.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But she gets pregnant.
Okay.
Then in 1976, Betty takes a job as a teacher at an elementary school in Wiley, Texas, which is really close to Plano. But she wasn't too happy there either because she didn't feel like she could control her students very well. And on top of this, she has this thing. She doesn't like it when Allan travels for work. She really hates being home alone.
Okay.
Now, me, I love a good weekend home alone. Rob goes off with his buddies. I clean my house. It stays perfect the whole time. I'm not saying he's the one who messes up the house, but maybe.
Since there's only two of us living here.
I can eat ice cream for dinner if I want to. It's just, but I like being at home every now and then.
Sure.
Every now and then.
Sure.
But Betty does not like being at home alone at all. And Betty and Allan are really both highly involved at their church, the First United Methodist Church, under the direction of Reverend Ron Adams.
Okay.
And it's at this church that both Allan and Betty Gore meet Candy Montgomery. Candy Wheeler grew up an Army brat, and her family moved from base to base all throughout her childhood. Her dad was a radar technician who had spent the past 20 years after World War II bouncing the family just from base to base.
Right.
And apparently, according to Candy, it wasn't a happy childhood, and she didn't like her mother. I guess Candy's mom was abusive to her. And when Candy would cry or be upset, she would tell Candy to, shh. That's called foreshadowing.
Uh-oh.
But Candy's this independent spirit. She moved out of the house and on her own at the age of 18 as soon as she finished high school. And although she worked, she dreamed of being a full-time mother and wife. She just hadn't found the right man.
Right.
Now, Candy dated. She even had a few sexual encounters, but none of them were what she was looking for because the man she intended to marry had to be wealthy. That was her first and foremost steadfast rule.
Well, there are priorities.
She has her priorities. Yeah, she doesn't. She wants a guy with money. And the first time she laid eyes on Pat Montgomery, she wasn't very interested. She thought he was really introverted. She's very extroverted, but she thought he was really introverted. She didn't think he was too handsome, but Pat was destined to be wealthy someday.
Right.
So Candy gave it another chance. And when Pat proposed to Candy, she decided this is the best she's going to get in the foreseeable future. And so she agrees to marry him.
She's looking at it as a possible investment.
She's looking at it as an investment. Now, they're not yet part of the upper financial class. This couple had a very small wedding, followed by a fairly inexpensive honeymoon. They didn't go anywhere special.
Right.
Pat was working as an electrical engineer at Texas Instruments, and she was working as a secretary. Now, Candy, like I kind of said before, she has this magnetic personality, and she knew that if she acted a certain way or flirted at just the right time, she could exact power over men.
Wow.
She could get her way with men.
So she was a master manipulator.
She's a manipulator. Very good. She is a manipulator.
Yeah.
But not so much, well, I guess she does manipulate women too, but very much with men.
Right.
Candy's a full-time mom with 2 children, a son and a daughter, and her social life really revolved around the First United Methodist Church. And by 1979, Pat is earning enough money for them to live very comfortably in their dream home in Lucas, Texas. And the home that they lived in wasn't too far from where the famous Dallas TV show filmed. That estate was really nearby.
Okay.
Now, Candy is tall. She's sort of broad-shouldered. She's athletic, and she's about 5'8". She's really outgoing. She's very likable. She teaches Sunday school. She sings in the church choir. And it's through the church that Betty and Allan Gore meet and befriend Candy and Pat Montgomery.
Okay.
It's all happening down to the church.
Here it comes.
And Betty and Allan and Candy and Pat's daughters are actually friends, okay? So it's more than just them knowing each other from church. The girls are actually friends too.
Okay.
Now, in the fall of 1978, Betty decides she wants another child. And this time, she wants to time out her pregnancy. Now, I know people who do this. You know, they're like, I want to get pregnant here, so I can have a baby here.
Right.
Yeah, the Lord works in mysterious ways. Sometimes you have a baby when you weren't even expecting it. And they become blessings.
The stork shows up when you least likely expect it.
Yeah, you know, everybody says you got a plan for a baby. And then the people who have babies are like, no, you just have a baby. Yeah. And then you make plans.
Right.
So if you're thinking about having a baby, just go for it.
Yeah.
But she wanted to have this baby when she's off on summer vacation from teaching. So she wants to get pregnant on her own timetable. And this is going to be a problem because Allan and Betty didn't have sex all that often.
Oh.
And now when they do, it's just to make a baby.
Yeah.
There's no romance. She just needed his sperm.
It's all clinical.
It's very clinical. And she needed it every night.
Wow.
When Betty is ovulating. She's like, every night I want it. I'm pretty sure if you're trying to have a baby, you're supposed to have sex every other night.
Oh.
There's Chris's tip for getting pregnant.
Okay. So if you don't want to get pregnant, don't have sex every other night.
No, I guess the thing is that the guy needs a chance to sort of recover. So you have a better chance of getting pregnant if you wait a day. So every other night.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But Allan is having to be the sperm factory every single night. And he felt used. And on top of that, Betty complains a lot, which doesn't make a very romantic setting. You know, she wants to get pregnant. She's sort of complaining, and
it's a good way to shoot a man's horse.
Yeah, shoot the horse, man. That's it.
Wow.
But Allan was of the mindset that marriage is forever, till death do us part.
Yeah.
But his sex life with Betty has become very routine and extremely unimaginative. Now, Allan really enjoyed having sex. He's a man.
Right.
And he kind of thought that Betty did too, but there wasn't much enthusiasm in Allan and Betty's bed. And Allan's tired from working long hours. He didn't travel much because Betty didn't like being alone. She wasn't happy at school. She wasn't happy at home. She wasn't happy with the sex life.
She just wasn't happy.
I don't think she was happy.
Yeah.
And instead of just shaking off a bad day, when she would come home, she would ignore Allan and just grade papers. And Allan is bored.
Yeah.
However, all the sex when Betty is ovulating, Betty did get pregnant.
Okay.
But soon after, fellow choir member Candy Montgomery starts to pay attention to Allan Gore.
Okay.
And he liked getting attention because he really wasn't getting it at home.
Yeah.
And he liked it a lot. And to him, it's harmless because they're at church.
Right.
She's just talking to him at church.
Right.
And he loved Betty. But it was really nice to have somebody like Candy chat it up with him.
Right.
And at home, in Candy's house, in the Montgomery house, Candy, she's pretty sexual. But she's also pretty sexually unsatisfied with her husband.
Gotcha.
So she's flirting pretty hard. And a week or so after that night of choir practice, Allan would see Candy again. And this time, it was at a church volleyball game. They were both playing volleyball. And I actually read where their meet cute was kind of when they collided, like going for a ball.
Yeah.
And Candy thought that Allan just smelled swell.
Oh, jeez.
She thought he smelled really good. I guess Allan's putting out some pheromones.
Yeah.
But after the volleyball game, Allan and Candy stay behind and they clean up the gym. And after these two walk out to the parking lot together, they make it to Candy's car and Allan asked, "What's on your mind, Candy?"
Uh-oh.
And Candy tells Allan, "Get in the car." And he does.
Wow.
So they're sitting in Candy's car and Candy point blank asks him, quote, "Would you be interested in having an affair?" End quote.
Wow.
She knows what she wants.
Yeah, it's pretty direct.
Candy knows what she wants and Candy goes for what she wants.
Wow. Okay.
Now little mild and meek Allan is shocked. Here's Allan with the receding hairline and the horn-rimmed glasses who's on baby making watch. And he tells her that he doesn't know what to say.
Yeah.
And she basically says to him that it was something that had been on her mind and she just wanted to say it so she didn't have to think about it anymore.
Jeez. Okay.
So Allan says, "Look it." I'm paraphrasing all of this, by the way.
Right.
Allan says, "Look it, I don't think I could do it. And besides that, I love Betty. And she did have an affair on me. And I know how much that hurts. And I wouldn't want to do it to her."
Wow.
And Candy's like, "Yeah, I love Pat too, and I wouldn't want to hurt him either, so..."
Yeah, right.
And Allan says, "Yeah, like Betty's pregnant now, and it wouldn't be fair to her, and besides, I don't feel the same way about you that I do about Betty."
Right.
To which I say, "I would hope not. Betty's your wife."
Yeah, exactly. Jeez.
But Allan tells Candy, "Look, I don't think I could do it."
Okay.
And Candy says to him, again, I'm paraphrasing, "It's all good.
Yeah. Just thought I'd bring it up.
I was just bringing it up.
Yeah, nothing ventured, nothing gained.
But I'm going to leave it up to you to decide where this goes.
Well, okay.
I don't want to hurt your marriage." Quote,
Yeah.
"All I wanted to do was to go to bed." End quote. She tells him she won't bring it up again. So what does Allan do? He's sitting in the car with her.
Right.
He's got a couple of options. He can say, "Thanks, Candy. I'm flattered. I'm married."
Right.
Men, this is what you should say. "I'm flattered. I'm married."
Well, wait, let me back up here just real quick. First of all, he shouldn't have been getting in a car with another woman alone. Hello?
They're at church, honey. They might have been talking about volleyball, or they do all sing in the choir together as well.
Let me go back again. You shouldn't be getting into a car with another woman by yourself. I don't care if you're at church or you're at the liquor barn.
Well, now I've had to get in the car with business colleagues before.
She's not a business colleague.
That's true. You are speaking the truth.
Yeah.
You are speaking the truth.
Yeah.
But he gets in the car, all of this transpires, and then before he gets out of the car, he could just say, "Thanks, I'm married," and get out.
Yeah.
But what does Allan do? Do you want to take a guess?
He gives her a kiss.
He leans over in the car and he kisses Candy.
Yeah.
And then he just yeets on out.
No, jeez.
So Candy and Pat, her husband, had been arguing a lot. And Candy was taking this writing class, and she was doing well in this class, and she was getting A's on her papers. But when she brought them home to show Pat, he was just like, yeah, whatever. He dismissed her.
Right.
And when Candy would call him out over it, these two would get in a fight. Then on Candy's 29th birthday, and in the middle of her being so put out with Pat, after she gets the kiss in the car from Allan, Candy gets a phone call. It's Allan telling her that he had to go to McKinney the next day, which is an area in Texas, and get new tires checked on this truck he just bought. And so he asks her if she would like to have lunch with him so they could talk a little more about, quote, what we talked about before.
Uh-oh. Sorry, just had to add that.
So these two meet up. I'm sorry.
That's what you get married a musician.
This is my cross to bear, y'all. But these two meet up at the auto repair shop in McKinney, just a few miles from where Candy lives. And when Candy sees Allan, this time she's a little embarrassed that she's kind of thrown herself at him. But at the same time, she's been thinking about this kiss. Like after the kiss, she could think of nothing else.
I'm thinking that a woman that would give a proposal like that in a car probably is not embarrassed very easily. So
I'm telling you, she said she was embarrassed.
Yeah, whatever.
So,
whatever,
yeah.
Candy. Whatever makes you feel better.
I mean, she's got some cojones.
Yeah.
She's out there putting out that,
Yep.
not that women shouldn't ask for what they want, because Candy did. Just maybe not with a married man.
Yeah, exactly.
But he gives her a birthday card, and on the front it read, for the last of the red hot lovers.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And inside, Allan had placed a little bag of Red Hots. And these two leave Allan's car at the shop, and he hops in Candy's car, and they drive to this little tea house where they talked about their spouses and their children and the church. Allan told her about his work. She told him about her creative writing classes. And as it's all winding down, Allan said to her, quote, I've never done anything like have an affair before, end quote. And Candy tells him, yeah, me neither.
Okay.
So Allan says he'd never be able to forgive himself if Betty found out. She'd be devastated.
Right.
And Candy says, yeah, she feels the same way. They couldn't allow anyone to know anything about their affair. They also decide that neither wants to get emotionally involved with one another. So you can see where how this conversation is progressing.
Right.
They decide they don't want to get emotionally involved. So they decide to table the whole idea. But a week later, Allan calls Candy while Pat's at work, and these two hash out the risks if they decide they're going to have this affair.
This sounds like a business deal.
A little bit of a business transaction. And in this phone call, Candy says to Allan, quote, if you don't go to bed with me pretty soon, Allan, then you'll never be able to live up to the expectation I have of you in bed, end quote.
Once again, the master manipulator strikes.
Yeah. That was manipulative and seductive at the same time.
She's good.
To which Allan says, quote, yeah, I know. I thought about that.
Oh, man.
I did. I thought about that.
Wow.
So these two wait another month, where they meticulously plan this love affair. And you have to understand, these two are seeing each other all the time.
Yeah.
Choir practice, church every Sunday. The kids, have Bible school together. And volleyball they're playing together, where she's bumping up against his pheromones and miraculous smell, right?
Yep.
But they're meticulously planning this affair.
Okay.
And there were daily calls where Allan would call Candy from work, and she's starved for affection, and she can't wait to talk to him either. This happens every day.
Wow.
Then at the end of November 1979, Candy has an idea. She invites Allan to her house for lunch. She fixed her famous lasagna. By the way, she cooks all the time.
Okay.
I left out all the different things that she made. It was a little bit funny, but she cooks all the time, and she's kind of like famous for always having good food.
Right.
She also decides on this lunch that before Allan arrived, that if nothing happened soon, she wasn't going to waste any more time on Allan. She'd done what she could do to make it happen. It's really Allan's decision to make.
Right.
He was so damned indecisive, though, that she was starting to think he wasn't aggressive enough to do this anyway.
Right.
So I think, even though I didn't read this anywhere, that Candy's thinking, if he's this mealy mouthed, what's he like in bed?
Right.
He's not an assertive person.
Right.
And I get the feeling that Candy wants somebody who's assertive in bed.
Right.
Now, at this lunch, Candy had butcher paper hanging up in her house. So when he walks in, he sees this butcher paper hanging up. And one said the word wise. And the other had the two words, why not?
Okay. Oh, man. Okay.
She wants to hash out the pros and cons.
Jeez.
It really is kind of like a business transaction.
Yeah.
And when Allan was worried about becoming emotionally involved, Candy told him, quote, Allan, as far as I'm concerned, this is just for fun. I'm not serious about it. It's just a companionship thing, and we shouldn't be afraid of it. Whatever happens, we'll do it for a while, and then it will be over, end quote.
It sounds all too perfect and easy.
They're really sort of rationalizing away
It's just sex.
why it's wrong. Yeah. She also tells him that if they don't have the affair, they will always wonder. If we don't do this, we're always going to wonder, what if? But then she says, I'm leaving the decision up to you. We'll always wonder, but it's your decision to make, Allan. So she leaves the decision up to him. And after he leaves that day, Candy is like, what's the big deal? He's not my dream man or anything. So maybe mathematician Allan is taking the steam out of Candy's steamy fantasy, right?
Right.
But a few days later, Allan calls her and says, okay.
Game on.
I want to go ahead with it. But before they began the affair, there were some ground rules, and Candy made a list. And if there's a list, you know I'm going to tell you about it. So here it is.
Bring them on.
Number 1, if either one of them ever wanted to end the affair for whatever reason, it would end. No questions asked.
Okay.
If either one of them became too emotionally involved, the affair would end.
Okay.
If they ever started taking risks that shouldn't be taken, the affair would end.
All right.
All expenses, food, hotel room, gasoline would be shared 50-50.
Good Lord, my Disney contracts aren't this involved.
They would meet only on weekdays while their spouses were at work. Candy would be in charge of fixing lunch on the days they met. Remember, she's the cook.
Yeah.
So that they would have more time.
Wow.
And they figured they would need all of Allan's 2-hour lunch to make it happen.
Jeez.
Candy would be in charge of getting a motel room. For the same reason, they would meet on a Tuesday or a Thursday once every 2 weeks. That was because Candy was free only on days when her little boy attended the Play Day preschool at Allan Methodist Church.
Okay.
She took him each Tuesday and Thursday from 9 to 2. But she figured that she would need 3 out of 4 of those school days for all the other errands and church and school duties that are in Candy's hectic schedule.
Well, I mean, she's very methodical on what she needs to do and what's important.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then finally, after all the mental foreplay and decisions, which quite frankly, don't most people cheat? When they cheat, don't they usually say the same thing? I mean, we've all been cheated on. Mm-hmm. And the one thing the cheater always says is, it just happened, right?
Yeah.
It just happened.
Yep.
Well, these two can't say it just happened because they had more rules and plans than the United States Senate Committee on the Budget.
And probably more successful.
True. Finally, December 12th, 1978 is the day. It's D-Day, right? Candy spends the morning getting ready. She takes her kids to daycare and preschool. She fixes lunch for her and Allan. She packs her sexy panties and her negligee in her purse. And she heads to a hotel near Allan's work, the Continental Inn.
First class, baby.
Yeah, we had a Continental Inn in Lexington, Kentucky, where I grew up. There were some parties at the Continental Inn. That place has been raised. They need to have an exorcism over there, probably, exactly. On that land.
Yeah, take a Geiger counter, too. Jeez.
But the Continental Inn, this is where she is. She pays cash. She fills out the card in her own name. She drives her station wagon behind the no-tell motel. She gets in the room. She calls Allan and says, Continental Inn, room 213. And Allan probably left skid marks pulling out of the parking lot at work. I mean, can't you just imagine? Here we go. This is it.
I just imagine Fred Flintstone.
Or a Fred Flintstone.
Yeah.
So when Allan arrives, Candy has lunch sitting on the bed.
Okay.
It was like chicken a la king or something. I don't know. She always had these very elaborate meals.
Reminds me of Anchorman. Why don't we go out and do something, have a little sex, maybe some chicken.
Some sex, maybe some chicken. That is this case. But here's the thing. She's sitting on the bed. The lunch is on the bed. And Candy is wearing a pink peekaboo negligee.
Oh, wow.
Along with her chicken a la king or whatever it was. And Allan, who was nervous on his drive over, was thinking, what the heck? I mean, I'm here. She brought marinated chicken for lunch. We got chicken I'm going for it. This is it. I'm going for it.
Yep.
So first they ate, which to me, I was like, well, eat after. You're going to be hungry later. I mean, why would you eat first?
Yeah.
So they eat first and then they get it on.
Okay.
And Candy was kind of shocked at Allan's naivete as a lover.
Why was she shocked? I mean, come on.
Well, just wait.
Okay.
She's later going to say that when she stuck her tongue into Allan's mouth while she was kissing him, French kissing him,
right,
it was pretty apparent that he'd never had a French kiss before.
Really?
What?
Wow.
Come on, Betty. I mean, if she did have an affair on him, surely that guy.
Yeah.
Anyway, apparently Allan's an eager student and a quick learner.
All right.
And Candy was so responsive and energetic in bed, she rocked Allan's world.
And Allan was never the same after that sexual experience.
Nope, that was it.
Yeah.
He said it was more exciting than any type of sex he'd ever had. And according to one article, it didn't last very long. Wait. And he was weak for the rest of the afternoon.
Oh, Allan.
Didn't last long.
He was the 40-year-old virgin.
But he was weak for the rest of the afternoon. And he remembered that feeling for days. So after they have sex, Candy makes him take a shower, and she does as well, because she basically says, you can't go home smelling like me.
Yeah.
Allan was probably like, what? Yeah. And according to Candy, Allan showed great promise as a lover, and she hadn't had to fake her responses much at all.
Oh.
Which made me think of the Seinfeld episode. The breathing, the panting, the moaning, the screaming. Yeah. Fake. Anyway, they both wanted more. So a week later, just before the Christmas holidays, they agreed to meet for a repeat performance.
What happened to the every other week?
Well, I guess the week in the knees, Allan had to have it again.
Let's throw that contract out.
Yeah, woof, who cares? And again, this time, Candy cooks. And she heads to the hotel, but she chooses a different rendezvous spot, a seedier motel that was cheaper than the $29 she had spent at the Continental Inn.
Yeah, I guess it wasn't much of an investment.
Now they're at the Como Motel, where for $23.50 and a $2 deposit for the key, they could get it on as soon as she slid her money under the bulletproof glass.
Oh, man. Wow. Did they get sheets?
Those are extra.
Yeah, I was going to say, bring your own sheets.
She probably would have with her lasagna or whatever.
Yeah.
And for the remainder of 1978 and the first 3 months of 1979, Allan and Candy made sweet, sweet love every other week.
No.
These two would talk every day and would even exchange greeting cards and little letters. Candy would leave Allan notes under his windshield at work, under his windshield wiper at work. She would also leave brownies or treats in his car. So he would always scurry out at lunchtime to check to see if Candy had left him anything in the car.
Wow.
And one time, Candy left him a little statue of a boy and girl kissing with the inscription, quote, "Practice makes perfect," end quote. What do you think she's trying to tell him?
Yeah. A few more times, I think we'll have it.
I won't have to fake it. Fake.
Yeah.
Both Candy and Allan felt alive. That is, until guilt started to outweigh the benefits of their sexual trysts. By February of 1979, Candy tells Allan that she's getting in too deep. She's falling in love with him. And remember, that was on the list.
Well, they already threw that contract out.
Well, I think they thought that because they made that contract, it meant something.
Yeah.
She tells him, "I'm thinking about you too much." To which Allan tells her that it's all temporary and they won't get serious if they don't allow it to happen and that they just need to let it run its course.
Well, Allan's the one that's running the train now. That's funny.
Translation, I'm not giving up my no strings attached piece of ass at the Como Hotel.
Yeah.
Now, remember, these two are both highly involved in their church, and they see each other all the time. So it's kind of exciting, like they're exchanging glances, during choir practice.
Some enchanted evening. Sorry, go ahead.
But as the affair continues, Allan's wife, Betty, is getting more pregnant and more pregnant. So in early June, Allan tells Candy, it's time to pause the affair, not end it.
Right.
Just discontinue it for a little bit because Betty would need him. And what if, God forbid, he was at the no-tell motel getting it on with Candy when Betty went into labor?
Sure. Yeah.
What if she couldn't find him?
Right.
And Allan thought about what it would be like to be married to Candy. Like he's weighing all this in his head. She's pregnant. She's having this baby. I wish I was married to Candy and this was Candy's baby.
Yeah.
But he's never going to divorce Betty either.
Right.
Then in June, Candy put together a sit-down Chinese dinner for the church choir that Allan and Betty are both a part of. But the real reason for the dinner, it was a surprise baby shower for Betty. It's Candy's idea. Okay. So ladies, just think about this.
Right.
You're pregnant and your husband's side piece is throwing you a surprise baby shower at the church, no less. And you think it's amazing that Candy is so nice. But more importantly, Candy looks like she's a saint, a completely thoughtful person for doing this.
Right.
That'd be a tough pill to swallow, right?
Yeah.
Betty and Allan's baby is born in early July. They name her Bethany. And having the baby brought Allan and Betty closer together. And I even read that they had the baby and for an entire week they kept the news to themselves so that they could enjoy their family and each other.
Okay.
But it's not going to last because by late July, this baby isn't even a month old, and Candy and Allan are back at it at the Como Hotel, getting it on.
Yeah.
But it wasn't as hot as it was before. Candy started complaining about little things that didn't matter to Allan, and he felt guilty for leaving Betty alone with this new baby and their young daughter and being with Candy, who's complaining.
Yeah, sure.
I'm sure he does.
Yeah.
Now, Betty and Allan leave Texas for a week to head back to Kansas and Betty's family so they could see the new baby.
Right.
But before he leaves, he and Candy make plans to see each other the Friday after he returns. But Betty and Allan don't make it home until late Thursday night, and he planned to take off Friday as well to be with Betty after their trip home. He's not going to be able to sneak out at lunch and the Como Hotel for his hookup with Candy if he doesn't go to work on Friday.
Sure, right.
And he can't leave her there waiting for him at the hotel without an explanation.
Right.
So he whips up this excuse to call Candy. I think it was something to do with church. And he's trying to tell Candy he won't be bringing an al dente noodle to the spaghetti house over at the Como Motel.
Okay.
And Candy and Pat are getting ready to go on vacation of their own, which only meant that Candy's not going to be able to see Allan for another 2 weeks.
Gotcha.
So when Allan hangs up, Betty says to him, "Gee, that sure was a long conversation."
Uh-oh.
Yeah,
The suspicion starts.
you're right.
Yeah.
But when Candy and Pat are back from their vacation, Allan and Candy meet at the Como Hotel. Now, that same exact night, Betty wanted to make love. They hadn't had sex since the baby was born. And now Betty wanted to have sex with her husband.
Yeah.
And of course, Allan is caught off guard because he and Betty didn't really ever have sex, and she had never made the first move. She was actually being assertive. But Allan, who remember is weak after spending his afternoons with Candy, Allan's tapped out. And he's so surprised by Betty's advances, he's not fast enough on his feet to give her a decent excuse.
Yeah.
So he tells her he didn't feel like making love.
Yes, a little rejection will always get you crucified.
I mean, come on, Allan.
Yeah.
At least try, dude.
Yeah.
I mean, if you at least tried, you could be like, "I'm sorry, honey. I'm so tired. I'm stressed at work, whatever." Right?
Yeah.
It happens to everyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very common. Isn't
Yep.
that what everybody says?
Yeah.
It happens to everyone.
Yeah.
But no, he just says, "I don't feel like making love."
Wow.
So Betty cried.
Wow.
Because she was humiliated.
Of course.
She'd never asked him to make love to her, and now she'd been turned down.
Yeah.
So she decides that Allan just doesn't love her anymore, that she's fat after having this baby, and he's disgusted by her. Okay. Gentlemen, if your lady has a child right after she has that baby, and for the months following, you better tell her how beautiful she is. It is rough having that baby.
Yeah.
So you tell her how great she is.
Yep.
Allan's doing the exact opposite.
Wow.
Allan tried to tell her that all of those things were true. He didn't think she was fat. He wasn't disgusted by her. He just didn't want to make love to her.
Yeah.
But the damage was done.
Sure.
Damage is done. So a guilty Allan calls Candy the next Monday and says, "We need to talk."
Yeah.
He tells Candy they need to end the affair because he's afraid of hurting Betty. "Well, Allan, I think the barn door was open and the horse is out."
They're out running around.
Yeah, you're a little too late on that one.
Yeah. Yep.
He tells Candy he needs to get his life back in order. And Candy is not happy about it because she had told him she was catching feelings. And he said, "We need to let it run its course." Right?
Yep.
Still, they stopped sleeping together, but they did talk constantly. After Allan refused Betty's advances, Betty fell into a deep depression. God love her heart. She'd just had this baby. This lasted several weeks.
Yeah.
Betty was depressed. I'm sure she had some postpartum depression.
Sure.
And even though she started teaching again in the fall, she was seeing the family doctor for all these ailments. She had soreness in her neck and shoulders. Same, Betty.
Yeah.
And pain in her body. Same, Betty.
Yeah.
But the doctor thought it was all stress related. Same, Betty.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he still prescribed her pain pills.
Okay.
Now, also during this time, Allan takes a new job. He and some of the guys he worked with at Rockwell started a telephone answering system. It meant more money and stock options, but it also meant travel. And remember, Betty doesn't like to be left alone.
Right.
And on the flip side of this new adventure, Allan tells Candy that he can't see her anymore because of his new job and its demands. But Candy wants to meet just one more time.
The farewell, yeah, whatever.
You wouldn't even say the word.
No. I think everybody knows what I'm saying.
Yeah. So they meet up at the Como Motel, the No-Tell Motel, for a quickie, and then talk about how they will live without each other. Candy didn't want the affair to end. So these two meet again, but not at the motel. They had lunch in a park in North Dallas on a blanket under a tree. Very storybook, right?
Yeah.
Candy tells him she doesn't know if she can make it if they break up. Yeah. It's like Fatal Attraction.
Yeah, big time.
I'm not going to be ignored, Dan.
Oh, wow.
Allan tells Candy that he really wants to make it work with Betty, the mother of his children, and that they were going to this church-sponsored marriage retreat called Marriage Encounter.
Okay.
So Allan and Betty go to this marriage retreat where they try to get in touch with their own feelings and why they fell in love in the first place, all while being cut off from everyone and everything. They only had each other and they had to focus on each other.
Right.
They each had to write a love letter to the other on the feelings of disappointment in their marriage.
Okay.
So Allan says he doesn't feel like he knows how to make Betty happy and that he comes second to her classroom and he's jealous of her commitment to being a teacher. He also confesses that he's lonely. And Betty, for her part, confesses that sex is an area where she and Allan were far apart. Something she said that stemmed from her upbringing where sex was dirty and wrong. That's what she was taught. But she wanted to be desirable to Allan, and she wanted to make him happy.
Okay.
And she confesses that she has a hard time relaxing enough to enjoy sex, but that she wanted to make love to Allan more and didn't understand why he was so disinterested. Well, Betty, it's because Allan's bumping uglies down at the Como Motel.
Yep.
Now, the last night, Allan and Betty made love, and the next day, they had one last writing assignment where they professed their love and were remarried, reaffirming their love with traditional vows. Which made me kind of think about something. You know, when you're married, when you're first married and you take those vows, it's like in front of everybody. You're worn out from wedding planning. You just want to get to your honeymoon. You say everything. But I wonder, and we've never renewed our vows, but I wonder when you say things like for better or worse, you really know what for better or worse is.
Yeah.
For richer or poor, you know what that is.
Sure.
Till death do us part.
Yeah.
You know what that is when you take those reaffirming vows, when you reaffirm your marriage vows.
Yeah.
So I think this was really powerful for them.
Well, and I think the most important phrase is to forsake all others.
Yeah.
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 Now, on their way home from this wonderful retreat, Allan and Betty stopped to pick up their daughter, Bethany, from Candy, who'd kept the baby for the weekend.
Okay.
Betty waited in the car and Allan went to the door where Candy asked him point blank, how was it and what does it mean for us? To which he replies, what do you think he says?
Man, at this point, I have no idea.
I don't know.
Oh, Allan, dude.
Allan should have said, it's over, Candy.
Yeah,
We're done. We're
yeah.
done.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a putz.
That's the nicest, that's the kindest thing you could say about him.
Oh, man.
Candy and Allan meet a week later at the park in North Dallas for another picnic lunch where Allan tells Candy that he doesn't necessarily feel different about her, but he was going to give his full resources to his family.
Okay.
To which Candy asks, quote, what does this mean for me? End quote. Candy tells him she's not sure she can deal with not seeing him. And again, I won't be ignored, Dan. I mean, she's back to that again. But Allan is too big of a wimp to say, Candy, it's over.
Yeah.
It's over.
Yeah.
So Candy tells him that if he's leaving it up to her, she's made a decision. She won't call or try to see him. Quote, I won't bother you anymore, end quote.
Right.
After that, Candy and Pat went to the same marriage retreat, but without the same results. It's now the summer of 1980, and they're all turning a page. Maybe. June 13th, 1980, Allan is leaving town on business. He's heading to St. Paul, Minnesota. He says goodbye to Betty. He says goodbye to the baby, Bethany, but not to their 5-year-old daughter, Alyssa.
Why not?
Because she's spending the night at Candy's house.
Ah.
Remember, the kids are friends.
Right.
So he's getting ready to leave for this trip. Betty can't stand to be alone at night. And for some reason, as he's packing up to leave, Alan's spidey senses are telling him something's up with Betty.
Right.
But they were planning on going on this European vacation back to Switzerland where they went for their honeymoon when he returned. Okay. Just the two of them.
Right.
No kids.
Right.
And he was hoping that this business trip would be more tolerable for her because as soon as he got back, they were going on this trip.
Right.
And Betty had told Allan that the trip was their second honeymoon, and she was very excited.
Okay.
But that morning, Betty was worried. Betty thought she might be pregnant. Now, Allan tells her not to worry. He doesn't think, I don't think you're pregnant. Okay, Allan, what are you basing that on? Whatever. The guy who doesn't even know how to French kiss is now telling his wife he doesn't think she's pregnant.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But he says to her, I promise I'll call you from the airport. Because the sound of his voice helped to reassure Betty that everything's okay.
Right.
So before he boards, he tries to call Betty at home. And the phone rings and rings and rings. There's no voicemail. Nothing like that.
Right.
So he hung up and he dialed again. Still no answer. So he assumes Betty and Bethany are out for a walk in the stroller.
Right.
And when he makes it to his hotel room in St. Paul, he tries to call again. Still no answer. So Allan starts to panic a little bit, and he calls his neighbor to go check on Betty. But he comes back to the phone and tells him, I've knocked on the door, there's no answer.
Okay.
But he also tells Allan, one of your cars is out of the garage, so maybe she's gone someplace.
Right.
And Allan then calls Candy and says, have you seen Betty? And Candy wants to know where Allan is. Where are you, Allan? And he tells her, I'm in Minnesota. But that's beside the point. Have you seen Betty? And Candy tells him, I saw her this morning when I went to pick up Alyssa's swimsuit.
Okay.
So let's start this day all over again, okay? June 13th, 1980, Alyssa, Allan, and Betty's oldest daughter wanted to spend the night at Candy's house with the Montgomery kids. They were going to see The Empire Strikes Back at the drive-in.
Oh, wow.
And Alyssa didn't want to miss out. And this particular week in June was Vacation Bible School week at the church. And the kids were all involved. And they're involved in everything that entailed, including Candy, right?
Right.
There are lots of parents who go and teach during Vacation Bible School.
Right.
So Alyssa wants to go back home with Candy's daughter and son after VBS for another sleepover and to see the movie. Now, what happens next? Only 2 people on this earth know the truth.
And one of them isn't there.
And one of them is dead.
Yeah.
You're so good at this, honey. That morning, while Betty is feeling very vulnerable, thinking she might be pregnant, something else happened. Apparently, Betty found all the cards and love notes from Candy to Allan.
Wow.
Candy showed up early at the house to pick up a bathing suit, and Betty was not expecting her. Candy had called earlier and said, Alyssa wants to stay with us. Is that okay? Sure, it's okay, but she has swim practice. And Candy's like, no big deal. I'll come by, pick up her swimsuit, and then I'll take her from Vacation Bible School to her swim lesson. And she tells Betty, I'll be by around noon. But she shows up around 10 a.m. So she's unexpected. Betty's not expecting Candy to show up yet.
Right.
And when Betty opened the door for Candy, she looked kind of annoyed. because their baby had just gone down for her morning nap. And I'm sure Betty didn't want Candy knocking at the door, waking the baby. Again, if you've ever had a newborn, it's like if that neighbor's dog barks one more time, I'm going to lose my mind.
Right.
So Betty answers the door. She's wearing these little red denim shorts and a yellow short sleeve pullover, and she's got on sandals.
Okay.
So Candy's there to pick up this bathing suit, right?
Right.
And she's early, which is making Betty a little annoyed. But she's still saying, look, Betty, I'm saving you this trip, to take her for her swim lesson.
Right.
Betty tells Candy to come in. Candy tells her she was just popping over from being at Vacation Bible School to get the swimsuit. Betty asks if Candy wants coffee. Candy asks if the baby is up, and Betty says, no, she's napping.
Right.
Betty then tells Candy if she's taking Alyssa to swim, that she doesn't like to put her face in the water. So when she does during swim lessons, she's rewarded with peppermints. Then Candy tells her, it's getting late. I need to get back to Vacation Bible School. So, Betty, if you'll just get the suit, I'll be on my way. And according to Candy, which is something I'm going to say a lot from here on out.
Right.
According to Candy, this is when Betty asks, while calmly sitting in a chair, quote, Candy, are you having an affair with Allan? End quote.
Oh, wow.
And Candy says, no, of course not. But then Betty counters with, but you did, didn't you? And Candy says, yes, but it was a long time ago. And Betty doesn't say anything, and Candy asks, did Allan tell you? But Betty's not answering. She just gets up from the chair and walks through the open door to the utility room and out of sight. And Candy is thinking, how long has she known? And maybe I should keep my mouth shut. I don't really know how to handle this.
Right.
Then according to Candy, when Betty reappears in the doorway, she's twitchy and she's carrying with her a 3-foot axe.
Oh.
Now remember I told you, Betty is 5'2".
Right.
She's kind of frail.
Right.
Not muscular at all. Candy's a sturdier woman of 5'8".
Yeah.
Now, according to Candy, Betty was holding the axe very clumsily. That was the word I read. And Candy stands up but doesn't step forward. Betty said to Candy, quote, well, don't see him again, end quote. To which Candy replies, I think I should just bring Alyssa home right after Bible school. Like she's like, I'm way out. I'm not doing this.
Yeah.
Betty tells her no. Betty's taking charge. Betty's taking charge all of a sudden. She's taking charge of this moment and the conversation.
Okay.
And she tells Candy to keep Alyssa, to take her to the movie because, quote, I don't want to see you anymore. Bring her home tomorrow, end quote.
That doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah. Well, she's saying, keep my daughter.
Yeah.
Get her. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Whatever.
Then Betty rests the axe against the wall just inside the living room and walks past Candy, telling her that she's getting a towel and for Candy to get Alyssa's suit in the utility room because it's on top of the washer. And while Candy is getting the suit, Betty comes up behind her and says, quote, don't forget Alyssa's peppermints, end quote, and hands Candy the towel. And Candy, who says she wanted to get out of that house, tells Betty, I've got peppermints. But Betty gets some from a candy dish. And then Candy drops the suit, the towel, and the peppermints into her bag. Candy places her hand on Betty's arm and tells her, I'm sorry.
Okay.
According to Candy, she does this. She places her hand on her because Betty looked so sad. But when she does this, Betty erupts in rage. She pushed away Candy's arm and shoved her back into the utility room. Betty grabbed the axe resting by the door and rushed in after Candy, but she had the blade pointed toward the floor. Betty tells Candy, quote, you can't have him, end quote. Then she screams at Candy, quote, you can't have him. I'm going to have a baby, and you can't have him this time, end quote. Candy put her hands on the handle of the axe as Betty moved closer to her, telling her that she doesn't want Allan. I don't want him. And according to Candy, Betty tried to control the axe, trying to jerk it away from Candy's grip. And when Candy told her to stop, and according to Candy, Betty said, quote, "I've got to kill you," end quote.
Okay.
Betty wrenches the axe out of Candy's hand and jerked it up. The blade hit the side of Candy's head. Candy's bleeding just a little bit from her forehead. This is when, according to Candy, Betty raised the axe over her head to hit Candy with a powerful blow. But Candy jumps sideways, and Betty only hit the linoleum, and then the axe bounced off the linoleum, hitting Candy's toe, cutting a little piece off.
Okay.
Now, at this point, Candy picks up the axe, and Betty starts shoving and jerking the handle, but Candy doesn't let it go, and these two struggle with this axe. Betty is kicking Candy in the legs. She bites Candy on the knuckle. Betty loses her footing, and Candy shoved the axe against Betty's body with all her might. Betty slipped as she slammed into the door of the freezer, and as Betty struggled to regain her footing, Candy brings the axe above her head and brings it down on the back of Betty's head.
Oh.
Candy dropped the axe and moved away from Betty. Blood is pouring out of her skull.
Wow.
Now, there's also an account where she says she heard it pop. But according to Candy, remember I said I'm going to use that a lot.
Sure.
According to Candy, Betty struggled to her feet.
Really?
After she's been hit in the head with an axe.
Okay.
Candy rushed to the front door, and when she reaches it, Betty slams her body against Candy and the front door. Betty then raises the axe, and Candy begs for her life and asks to be let go. Just let me go. To which Betty replied, quote, "I can't." These two struggle with this axe again. Now, remember, this is all according to Candy.
Sure.
And she split open the back of Betty's head with this axe, and they're still struggling and fighting.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
They fight their way back to the utility room, where Candy said she tried to escape through the garage, but Betty overpowers her. Betty grabs Candy's hair with one hand, and Candy slipped on the blood and went down in front of the freezer. And as she did, Betty tried to raise the axe, but now she's too weak. But when Betty didn't have the strength, Candy tackles her, and now they're fighting over the axe on the floor while sitting down.
Okay.
Candy shoves Betty and hops to her feet and tells Betty, quote, "Don't. I don't want him." And then Betty said, "Shh." And Candy grabbed the axe, and as Betty comes for her one last time, Candy raised the axe and brought it down with everything she had. Candy struck Betty over and over and over with the axe.
Wow.
43 chop wounds in total.
Good grief.
40 of them occurred while Betty Gore was still alive.
Wow.
Candy gets up and she takes a shower in her clothes inside Allan and Betty's home. But there's blood everywhere, including a bloody fingerprint on the freezer and a bloody sandal print on the floor because remember, she cut her toe and she's wearing these little sandals.
Right.
Then she leaves the house, drives home soaking wet, where she takes off all her clothes, soaks this maroon-colored shirt she's wearing in the sink to get out the blood, and puts her jeans in the washing machine. Then she puts on another pair of jeans, dries the shirt she's washed out in the sink, bandages up her toe, puts on tennis shoes, and goes back to the church where she tries not to limp due to the gash out of her little pinky toe. And she finishes up the day at Vacation Bible School.
Wow.
Praise the Lord.
Wow.
So now we're back to that night when Allan can't get in touch with Betty.
Right.
He has the neighbors try to break into the house, but they wouldn't need to. The guy who lives across the street from him actually was the real estate agent who sold them the house, and he's thinking, maybe I still have a key to this house.
Right.
But he and another two neighbors start walking around this house looking for an open window or anything. They see the dogs. They have 2 Cocker Spaniels that are in the backyard, and they're just yipping and yapping away.
Right.
But they check the front door last, and that is what is open. And what they found was the mutilated, beyond recognition body of little 5'2" Betty Gore.
Wow.
And inside her bedroom, little baby Bethany was dehydrated and wearing a horribly dirty diaper.
Wow.
The neighbors who discover Betty's body tell Allan over the phone that his wife has been murdered. But they say to him, she's been shot. She's been shot in the head. She looks so terrible.
Right.
That's what they think.
Sure.
And the three men describe the scene as something out of a horror film. And investigators were a tad put off by Allan's subdued demeanor when he gets home and they start to question him.
Right.
His wife had just been murdered, but he exhibits none of the emotions typical of a recent widower by a violent crime.
Right.
Sadness, anger, a demand for the case to be solved, wanting to see her. Nope. Right. Allan Gore was a man of few words, and when they asked him if he'd been having an affair, he said no.
Oh, man.
Police continue their investigation. They start questioning friends, relatives, and they're keeping their ear close to the ground for any gossip. And one of the people they talked to was Candy Montgomery. Candy's husband even tells police that Candy is so nonviolent, she won't even allow the children to have play guns in the house. When police start asking more questions, they find out from this little girl who saw Candy leaving the Gore's home. And they put two and two together and realize Candy Montgomery was the last person to see Betty alive. Not to mention, they've matched Candy's bloody fingerprint to the crime scene.
Right.
And the sandal print? Well, when Candy heard that little detail, she took the sandals she was wearing and cut them up and tossed them into the trash can. Now, when they question Allan again, he finally comes clean about his affair with Candy. So the police go back to Candy, but this time she's like, I'm not showing up without an attorney. And her newly retained attorney is a man named Don Crowder, a guy that they all go to church with.
Okay.
Now, mind you, she's been on the phone with all the ladies of the church, all the church ladies, clutching her pearls about the murder of poor Betty Gore and that poor baby that was left all alone.
Sure.
Finally, Candy is arrested 7 days after Betty's murder, and they do administer a lie detector test that was either inconclusive or she passed. She's arrested by Collin County Sheriff Jerry Burton. She's strip searched and photographed. She had bruises on her legs and an injury on her toe. When they take her to the hospital, Candy refuses to sign the consent form to be treated, so the sheriff signed it for her.
Oh, wow.
She had a cut to her toe and her forehead. Her attorney is going to argue to keep all of this out of the courtroom because it wasn't done with her consent.
Right.
Yeah.
The sheriff should have known that.
You would think, but I think everyone in this tiny town was so outraged.
Yeah.
They wanted somebody to blame.
Yep.
Now, Candy is out on bail after her $100,000 bond is posted.
Wow.
And she and her husband, Pat, went to church that very Sunday, where everyone went up to her and hugged her and told her that they believed her. But she had to come clean when a bloody fingerprint is found that belongs to Candy. And they let it be known that this bloody fingerprint belongs to Candy.
Wow.
Now, her attorney, Don Crowder, this guy gets in so much trouble over and over with this judge. He's held in contempt after they go to trial. He even has to spend 72 hours in jail while he's defending Candy.
Wow.
So this whole case goes to court. He begins the craziest journey in this case.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
He also fights with the court, and he gets snarky with the judge. The judge tells him to stick to a strict question and answer format, and he replied saying, quote, "I won't lay down for you," end quote.
Yeah, that's probably not a good thing to say to the judge.
Yeah, straight off to jail. That's contempt,
Yeah.
72 hours.
Wow.
Meanwhile, Candy is taken to psychiatrists, One in particular, Dr. Fred Faison, who does 4 to 6 hours of hypnosis on Candy, where she's able to relive the whole incident.
Oh, wow.
And when Betty tried to kill Candy, instead of her just taking the axe and leaving when she had the chance, she had this out-of-body experience. And the rage she felt intensified when Betty said, shh.
Really?
Because that's what her abusive mother would do to her.
Okay.
So yes, she killed Betty Gore, but she did it in self-defense. And in her mind, she was killing her mother.
All right.
That's the defense.
Well, that's a loose thread, but okay, go for it.
Now, another doctor, Dr. Maurice S. Green, a Dallas psychiatrist, saw Candy 12 to 15 times and concluded she suffered a, quote, dissociative reaction, end quote, in which she detached herself from the slaying. And this was why she appeared completely normal after she hacked Betty to death with 43 blows, 40 again of them while Betty is still alive.
Wow.
Candy actually took the stand, and her attorney said from the get-go that Candy did indeed kill Betty Gore, but she did it to save her own life. Candy told the jury Betty had evidence of the affair, letters from her to Allan, but Betty wrote to her parents just days before she's murdered, telling her mom and dad in the letter that Candy Montgomery was a good friend to her. But Candy was intelligent. She's attractive. She's direct. And she handled herself well on the witness stand. She is an attorney's dream. She told the jurors that she, quote, freaked out. And when the DA cross-examined her, he tried to find cracks in her story. But Candy had her story down pat.
Wow.
Allan takes the stand and said Betty never said anything about knowing about the affair that morning when he left, only that she was worried that she was pregnant. Now, a pathologist took the stand and said this was overkill.
Yeah, I think that's an understatement.
Yeah, Betty's arm was broken and her head alone had 28 blows.
Wow.
Her right eye had collapsed into a sinus cavity, and one gaping wound actually left her brain exposed. Now, the DA, Tom O'Connell, of course, he makes a strong case. Why didn't Candy just take away the axe and walk out?
Right.
Why, if she's such a compassionate person, did she leave this tiny baby alone all day in her crib?
Right.
If it was self-defense, why didn't she call the police after it was all over? The DA thinks he's got a slam dunk case. But when a jury of 9 women and 3 men returned their verdict, they deliberated 4 hours.
Yeah.
They came back with a verdict of not guilty.
Really?
Not guilty.
Holy. Wow, okay.
The courtroom was in shock.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And when she left that day, people were yelling at Candy Montgomery, murderer, murderer.
Wow.
Candy's husband, Pat, stood by her throughout the trial, and they moved to Georgia after it was all over. From there, it's not really known where they ended up. What is known is that she was certified as a family counselor. Candy was certified as a family counselor. I mean, I don't know. I'm sorry. It's hard. It's really hard to reconcile this whole thing in my head.
Wow.
Candy has never given an interview after this verdict. Allan, bless his heart, Allan married 3 months after the trial, although that marriage didn't last.
Yeah.
Betty's 2 girls were raised by her parents.
Wow.
Now, there are 2 current movies or serials about this case.
Okay.
Candy can be seen on Hulu. That's a serial. And Love and Death is on HBO Max.
All right.
They both came out in the last 2 years. Most recently, the HBO show released just this past spring.
Okay.
It's a lot to understand and reconcile. Everybody in this case, most of them have changed their last names, moved away, not given any more interviews. You can understand why.
Oh, sure.
But it's really hard for me in particular, and I hopefully other people, to reconcile this case.
Yeah.
Because she can't be tried again for this murder. I mean, it's all water under the bridge at this point.
Right.
Just poor Betty is murdered and no one's held accountable.
Right.
But that is the story of Candy, Betty, and Allan. And that's all I have to say about that. Hey, Hitch to Homicide listeners, the wait is over. If you're a reader or a fan of my Sex and Lies series, Book 10, Sex, Lies, and Rock and Roll is now available on Amazon. With a successful tour and 2 years of sobriety under his belt, rock star Noah Hart is ready to put his secrets and the past behind him. That is, until his former bandmates and business partners are murdered one by one, and suddenly he becomes the prime suspect. When FBI agent Louisa Hathaway is assigned to the case, no one, including her partner, is aware she carries her own secrets, including an undeniable infatuation with rock and roll's bad boy, Noah Hart. As the body count rises, Agent Hathaway is torn between unraveling the truth and falling for the man who might be the killer. Don't miss this new book, Sex, Lies, and Rock and Roll, by me, Chris Calvert. Only on Amazon. Rock and roll will never die, but it might kill you.
Oh, what a tangled web we weave, right?
When first we practice to deceive.
That's it. Allan, well, first of all, he was a bonehead for having an affair. But then to get involved with someone like that, good Lord.
But you can kind of see where Betty's parents would be like, okay, Allan, we're going to take these two girls and raise them, without you.
Absolutely.
And, my heart goes out to those kids.
Yeah.
My heart really goes out to those children.
Yeah. Well, sometimes they're just not justice.
Yeah. Sometimes justice isn't fair.
Yeah.
There's justice.
Yeah.
It's not always fair. They went to court. That was justice.
Yeah.
It's just not fair.
Well, let's bring up a few that did actually get justice with a little bless your heart. All right, number 1, license, registration, and an attorney, please.
Okay.
All right. Anthony Kenneth, and I hope I get this last name right, Mastrogiovanni.
Ooh, he's Italian.
I know. Was impersonating a police officer when he pulled over another car for speeding.
Oh, my gosh. Okay.
The driver quickly sussed out that Mastrogiovanni was fibbing since he, too, was a cop. But in this case, the kind of cop who doesn't have to pretend he's a cop because he really is a cop.
How fortuitous.
I know. Mastrogiovanni was arrested for impersonating a police officer.
Yeah.
He's out of there.
Yeah. By the way, safety tip.
Yeah.
If someone tries to pull you over and you're suspicious of the car behind you, like it's like an unmarked car or something, call 911, give your location and say, I am being followed. Please let this police officer know I'm heading to this location or to this precinct or whatever, and stay on the phone with them. You don't have to pull over if you're suspicious.
Exactly. Better safe than sorry.
Always better safe than sorry. But call 911, otherwise
you're gonna.
It's a police chase.
Yeah, exactly. All right, number 2, a crime that's a little too heavy. Clive Halford thinks big. The British career criminal stole a truck and loaded it with 18 pallets of stolen nickel copper worth around 150 pounds, which is about $250,000.
Oh, wow.
Yes, the haul was absolutely huge. In fact, too huge. Cops arrested Halford after the truck suspension collapsed under the weight.
Oops.
Yeah, but check this out. Earlier, Halford had stolen a car, overloaded it, and broke its suspension too. Did learn his lesson the first time.
Yeah, some people can't learn their lesson.
Duh. All right, number 3 and our last one. And this is actually from one of our in-laws and outlaws, Rebecca. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Rebecca.
it. Yeah, and it's a good one. A southern Indiana man was pulled over Wednesday night for allegedly driving a Power Wheels Jeep while intoxicated.
Like a little kid's Power Wheels Jeep?
Yeah, Google that. You'll get a bigger laugh. All right. According to the Indiana State Police, a trooper was patrolling in Vincennes in the 2500 block of North 2nd Street at about 9 p.m.
Vincennes, Indiana. I know where that is.
Yeah, you used to live in Indiana.
I used to live in Indiana.
Yeah. He saw a man driving there in the roadway with no lights or reflectors. The trooper...
That's what he saw?
That's what he saw. The trooper stopped the man and said he had signs of impairment and failed the sobriety test. ISP said the man was taken to Good Samaritan Hospital in Vincennes, and it was determined he was under the influence of methamphetamine and marijuana.
Oh.
Yeah, he was loading it up. The driver of the Power Wheels Jeep was identified by ISP as 51-year-old Vincennes resident John Albert McKee III.
Oh, John. What kid? There's a kid out there without his wheels.
I know. The trooper arrested McKee on the following charge: operating a vehicle while intoxicated with a prior conviction, level 6 felony. McKee was eventually booked at the Knox County Jail.
Oh, bless his heart.
A power Jeep.
A power Jeep. How did he fit into it? That's what I want to know.
I have no idea. Jeez. Well, there's your bless your heart.
Oh, those were good.
Yeah.
Well, if you have a bless your heart or you know somebody's heart who needs blessing, you can go to hitchtohomicide.com where there's a pulled down menu. You can also suggest a case, just like this one was suggested.
Yeah.
Like by 3 or 4 people.
Yeah.
We're so glad that you joined us again today. That's my amazing husband out there.
And that's my beautiful bride in the booth.
Join us next time on Hitch to Homicide.
Bye, y'all.